Welcome to our afternoon service. Hello, Heather. It's nice to have you there.
Hi, I'm Ellie.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
I just saw that. Never apologise for being Ellie. Jim, it's really good to have you with us. We enjoyed having you this morning, and we're grateful you could join us for this afternoon. We're going to hear from you and about the work of Youth for Christ, and then we'd love to spend a bit of time in prayer with you. But let me hand over to you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for taking time out of your afternoon, especially those who heard me this morning. That's what you call, being a glutton for punishment. So thank you so much for spending your time this afternoon. As I mentioned to a couple of people earlier, we're trying to, launch our new in-person youth group here at out in Willingham, where we live, this evening. So that's what's immediately on the agenda after I leave this meeting. So it's all good here. The kids are all getting involved. We're praying that the rain stays off, and it's good. So if you haven't met me before, my name's Jim Overton, and I'm director at Cambridge and District Youth for Christ. We're really about seeing young people's lives changed by Jesus. Which, I mean, to be fair, when you work for Youth for Christ, the clue's kind of in the title, it's a great privilege, really, to be involved in this kind of ministry where we get to share the hope of Jesus with the emerging generation. So I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully in the fullness of time you'll be able to see that and give you some images along with what I'm saying. To start with, really, I want to tell you a little bit about Connor. Now, Connor was somebody I met when we moved to Willingham. So we basically pitched up at the Church of England church here, and we inherited a youth group almost straight away because the vicar was retiring, and we looked like the obvious candidates. And so Connor was basically dragged along because he liked one of the girls in the group, and he'd met her doing kind of a citizenship volunteering thing over the summer. And so anyway, he pitched up to our youth group, and after a few weeks it became obvious that this was not, all was not well in his world. His home life was a bit disruptive, and yeah, he'd been wrestling with some issues for some time, and we found him quite hard to get through to, hard to get him to give an honest answer to any question. I remember one time sitting with him in Costa, where he was working on a Saturday, and I arranged this little meet with him after work, so we had a coffee and chatted. At the end of the conversation, as you do when you're looking to get alongside a young person, you say, hey, how about we do this regularly? Maybe we can open the Bible together. And his honest answer was, nah, you're all right, mate. So my great approach to him in discipleship had fallen on deaf ears. And after a while, we lost touch with Connor. He stopped coming for about 6 months. And then one Sunday he came back to our group, and he'd encountered some girls who were leading the Christian Union at Long Road Sixth Form College. And he said to me, these were people I met who are like what I want to be, because they talk about Jesus all the time. And I'm like, wow, what's happened to you, Connor? And it turned out that he'd been away on a Cypher camp and really encountered God that summer. And so it was that on August the 31st one year, he was having a conversation with my wife in our kitchen and wasn't sure what he was going to do on September the 1st, having finished his studies. And so it was, he finally decided that he would commit to doing a year out with Youth for Christ. So there it was, the day before the course started, he said, yeah, all right, I'll do it. And that year we started to see, kind of what people do a gap year for, that being immersed in a community. It was all about knowing and loving Jesus, having the opportunity to serve and to lead others, really started to enable his faith to take root in his life. Now, are you able to see my screen here? Maybe you can't. What's the...
We can see the first slide. We're about seeing young people's lives.
Amazing.
Oh, there you go. What makes the change?
That is Connor. So he's now doing a youth ministry degree with us, with our training partner, and it's brilliant. So he's basically working at Hope Church in Chesterton under Andy Atkins, and it's brilliant. Last week I was catching up with him, and he was just sharing with me how much he has a heart for young people on the margins who maybe haven't grown up in faith, but he wants to spend time with them. There's a couple of guys he meets with every week, and one of them ended up kind of by accident coming to their kind of evangelistic Bible study and stayed to the end, which he was really encouraged by. So it's brilliant to see a story like Connor, who's come from outside the church into faith, and now is seeing to change other young people's lives. And that is the change really we long to see. Not that everyone has to become youth workers, you'll be pleased to know, but that they hear the call to participate in building the kingdom of God. So we have this mission statement for our centre to see a culture-changing number of young people becoming mature disciples of Jesus. It seems to me that things need to change. That's why we talk about changing culture. And because we need to be deliberate about that. It's my opinion is that the world of young people is in something of a crisis. Yes, it's always difficult being a teenager in any time, but at the moment there's a sharp focus, isn't there, on a crisis of identity, because no one is telling young people who they are and therefore how to live. The message, the voice of our culture is, hey, young people, you figure it out. Look inside yourself for the answer. But we know, don't we? We weren't supposed to look at ourselves for the answer. We're supposed to get our identity from outside of ourselves, ultimately from our creator, God. And so that means we need, that's why we say culture changing number of young people. We need things to change in a big way. And we also talk about mature disciples, because we're reminded, aren't we, in Colossians 1:28, where Paul says, we proclaim him, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom, in order that we may present everyone perfect in Christ. It's as if when Paul looks at the end of his ministry, he's parading the individuals that he's brought to know Jesus before him, because here they are, once trusting in the grace of God, putting their faith in his death and resurrection, and enduring to the last day. And so he's presenting them before Christ, and we want to do that. And so the goal, therefore, is not just to get young people through church without them ending up hating God. In fact, that they begin a lifelong journey following Jesus as disciples. So that's the goal. We want to equip young people for maturity. So let's see. Here we go. Yeah, so it's true, isn't it, that we see this identity crisis fleshed out a little bit in the world. You know, there's a stat on the screen there, 1 in 3 15-year-olds have. And for those of us who work with young people, that is not unrealistic. It's not a surprise. I speak to my friends who are working in schools doing chaplaincy, and they say post-COVID, they're inundated with the need for more pastoral support in the school. And yet at the same time, we see 95% of children and of young people have no contact with the church. Scripture Union recently, began a national campaign about the 95%. How are we going to reach young people and children who otherwise wouldn't have any contact with the church? Timothy Keller, in his book Making Sense of God, talks about identifying the needs that are expressed in this generation, and he lists these 6 key things that he says that this generation are longing for: meaning and satisfaction, freedom, identity, justice, and hope. Now, you can see those things are fundamental human needs, aren't they? But there's something about this generation where we're hearing the cry for these things. We want meaning, want satisfaction. There's a cry for freedom and justice, a cry for identity and hope. And the truth that we know is, isn't it, that is the gospel has unsurpassed resources for meeting just these very needs. And so we can't afford to keep the message quiet. And I believe it's true. I believe that young people are desperate for someone to tell them the truth about Jesus and for a context in which they can safely process it. And we need to do both. We do need to build communities that are safe for young people, they feel safe in, that they can belong in a family context. And we also need in that place to share the message of the gospel. So there was a guy called Callum, whose mum brought his younger sibling to a toddler group and met my wife, who was running it in the village at the time, and a bunch of women began to go on a journey with the gospel, and she was one of them. And while she was hearing the message, she was like, "Oh, I hear you run a youth group," saying to my wife, "Well, my little lad Callum is about to hit year 7, and I really think he needs something. There's something about him where he's hungry. He's searching for spiritual things." And so it was that Callum came along to the youth group. It's interesting that a parent who's on a journey of faith would identify that there's something in young people that is hungry for more. And so he ended up coming to an evangelistic event we were running in Cambridge. And so you can imagine the scene afterwards where he'd been with us, with our youth group, to this event. And then he goes home and talks to his mum about it. So the next week, my wife Hannah speaks to his mum and says, so how did he get on? And waits for the answer. And she said, well, it's funny actually, because normally, he goes to something and I say, how was it, Callum? He's like, all right, but he said, Mum, it was amazing, because there were people there that really seemed to be like meeting in God. They had a real living faith. And then someone asked, would I like to take that step of faith? And his mum said to him, well, what did you do? He said, well, I wasn't really sure what to do, but I felt like it was something that like I had to do in that moment. Now, Callum, we lost touch with him because he didn't want to do Zoom youth group, but I'm hoping that if he doesn't come tonight, maybe he'll come in one of the next 2 weeks, along with his friend who's now become a regular member of the youth group. But isn't it interesting that parents are identifying something in their young people as like they need something because of the cry of this generation? So the question is, how do we do some of this stuff? Well, we do believe young youth ministry changes lives. Well, of course, it's the gospel that changes lives, isn't it? It's the power of God in his word. And we see that wherever we get the opportunity to share that with young people. So we do these things. We train churches. We invite churches to go on a 2-year journey with us and with others to share a vision and a strategy for youth ministry. And what that does with the churches that partner with us is they suddenly get a permission to think beyond surviving to next Friday's youth group, because everyone knows that's hard work. What are we going to do this Friday? But actually beyond that, beyond just getting people to show up, and instead to start thinking about making disciples. The second thing we look to do is multiply leaders. We want to equip the church with effective youth leaders. So, and we try and grow people up through our organization. So we have year out volunteers, and then we have a degree course that they can progress to. And we also have more experienced youth workers working with us. And really, it's alongside those kind of training up those ministers of the gospel for the next generation. We also want to start an epidemic of volunteers. We believe that youth ministry is the job of the whole church. So one of the things we've been privileged to do is run an annual event called the Youth Evangelism Conference. We started it in Cambridge 5 years ago, and it's become a national event also with a sister conference in Manchester, and we're hoping to do one in Scotland this coming year. And alongside that, we run a network to support local youth leaders and provide them with training. I'm just going to show you this. This is an image of some of the guys meeting at our 2-year program. Churches meet in teams and come to kind of at the conference. They get out their whiteboards and start to imagine, what they're going to do with the young people they're working with. Now this is it's a picture of Sam Graham, who is our worker in the villages south of Cambridge, and he started working with us a year ago, and alongside this project supporting rural parishes out there. And at the time, they really had one youth group meeting a month going on as lockdown had taken hold. And something happened when, you know, Sam turned up, that young people started coming out of the woodwork who wanted to meet together, and churches saw an opportunity to kind of start something new. And now there are 5 groups meeting across that patch. Some of them with young people from no church background, and the churches are discovering that what we were saying, that young people are really interested in faith, and it's encouraging that even in a global pandemic, that work has been growing. Where, and some of the villages have said to us, you know, we've never had a youth group before in living memory, and so it's brilliant to be able to offer that to local church. And the third thing we do is obviously look to transform young people. And I think our unique role as Youth for Christ is maybe provide those moments in support of local church, where we can present the gospel, maybe bring a different voice from their regular youth leader, so they have an opportunity to kind of hear it in a fresh way, and then go back to their youth groups and process what they've heard. And one of those events is called Fort Rocky. We run a weekend away twice a year, where we take young people age 11 to 14s away and hear the gospel and have an opportunity to respond. And we'd love to continue to grow that. We're looking to bring that event back this autumn as it becomes allowed. And it was great to be at join with you guys not so long ago when Alice was baptized. Remember, her story was involved hearing the message at Fort Rocky and making a response, and we'd love to do that for hundreds more young people. We also run a discipleship program called Forge for young people aged 14 and above, and many of them don't have a peer group of like-minded people in their church, and so we provide for them a once a month intensive session where they're looking at deeper issues about what it means to live for Jesus in their generation, and try to journey alongside their church to encourage them towards maturity and leadership. So I want to show you a little bit of a framework for how we think about ministry and mission with young people. And so the journey begins at the top there. We think about context. It's obvious, really, isn't it? To work with young people, we have to begin by building relationship, by meeting them in some way. And that can be, for many of us, it could be we start a youth group, we bring those that we know into that place. But others, it can be maybe an informal setting where they meet young people on the street and begin a conversation. And some of our churches are doing that work to connect with new young people. It could be in school, all sorts of ways, but the contact begins somewhere. And then we progress to try to build community with young people. There's something about this generation that longs for family. It's not that every family is dysfunctional, but there's significant numbers of young people who long for that sense of belonging. And we have something distinctive to offer in that, in the church, especially in our intergenerational nature. Where else can young people experience that? And as we give them access to community, and not just one super cool youth leader doing everything, but actually people from all generations getting alongside and showing love to them. And so the kind of things that can happen is we build community around an activity to get to know young people better. And then what we want to do is connect them to Jesus, to introduce the gospel. And one of the best ways of doing that is at the same time and place where they normally meet, rather than inviting them to something else. Is like, okay, if you're interested, we would love to invite you to open the Bible, to share something of what we've learned in our faith, and to share that with you. And when the community is strong, and when we've demonstrated that we care about them, then actually young people often are open to that. And then the final stage is commission. We want to commission all young people to live for Jesus and to make him known. And we see that, don't we, I think, in Jesus' own ministry with the disciples. He did not wait until they were the finished article. It was inherent in the call. It was, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. I'll teach you how to catch people. And so that's what we want to be doing in our ministry with young people, making them agents of change from the beginning, recognizing that they're not just called to know God for their own benefit, but actually to join him in his work of transforming the world and bringing everyone to himself. And so this little diagram here, this framework is really important to us at the moment, because we're sensing the priority for us in this season is to help churches grow their contact with young people, to meet young people in different contexts, even before they're perhaps asking the Jesus question. Because increasingly the church is in a position that if we just reach out to the friends of our members, there's going to be inevitably a huge portion of the population who aren't going to hear. And so we want to encourage churches to step out of their existing networks and engage with young people in new contexts. So we're kind of experimenting with new things. We're going to this coming year run an enterprise scheme in a school where young people can come along, make a little group out of their friends, and on a lunchtime group, and essentially put a little business together, and we'll teach them Christian principles for how to build ethical little units of enterprise, and so that will be a journey where they hear something of the gospel, and we can invite them to go deeper from there. We've developed, along with an experienced partner, a new program, believe it or not, of self-defense classes for young people, which is firmly rooted in a Christian worldview, explores relational principles. There's also a kind of video series coming out of this, which we want to present to schools, and each video uses a biblical character and exposes that what the Bible teaches about relationships and how we can apply it. So it's an amazing combination of physical, emotional, and spiritual connections in this, and we're just trialing it at the moment in primary schools, and schools are very open to it. Where there are Church of England schools, that's a great open door, and it gives us the opportunity to connect and share something of what we believe with young people who've never really thought about it before. We're partnering with a London-based sports ministry to set them up in Cambridge, and what they do is they do professional PE teaching in schools, but they also have a summer holiday program where young people come and do sport and get an opportunity to hear the Christian message, and they also have a thing called Kick Academies, where they kind of set up weekly sports groups with schools, and that's a great opportunity. So they're starting in Cambridge in September, working in a couple of days a week in a couple of primary schools. We also have a week-long sports mission this summer, the first week of the school holidays in Barnwell, working with Christ the Redeemer in Galfred Primary School, where we're hoping that maybe 70 kids will come, and each day there'll be a little gospel thought sharing with them, and an invitation to join in. And fourthly, this big area of young people's well-being, we've been invited in this last week to take up a new office space in the centre of town in St Andrew Street Baptist Church, where they have a shop unit, and we've got time in partnership with the church to open the ground floor to young people, a little bit at first, and hopefully then an increasing number of hours during the week, where we can connect, with an invitation to support young people in their own recovery from COVID, and actually invite them into some of these activities we've been describing, where they can hear more about Jesus. So that gives you something of an idea of what's going on in our heart and mind at the moment, in all these contexts where we've got opportunities to connect non-Christian young people with Christians, with believers, where change becomes possible. I was so encouraged to hear recently, Keith Prophet supports the youth group at Queen Edith's Chapel, and there's a girl there who'd been coming for a while, and the leaders thought, well, maybe she's not into the God stuff too much. But then she wrote a letter to the leaders, and she said in it, this youth group has been a lifeline for me. And she said, I might not look like I'm interested in the God stuff, in the Bible things you do, but you know what I am? I just have a lot of questions. Of course she does. Young people have questions. And you know what? We just need to get close enough to listen to them and have the opportunity to answer. There's a sense in which, in what we want to see as Youth for Christ, we kind of need everyone to get involved, okay? Because as we were saying earlier, that it's the job of the whole church to reach young people, and so, you know, we would love to invite you as a church, as you as individuals, to think about how you get involved in this mission to young people. Obviously, if you'd like to hear more from us, you know, we send out regular communications to those who want to receive that. If you'd like to support us, we would love you to pray for us or consider supporting us financially. That would be wonderful. That would make a huge difference to us. But actually, the invitation is to be part of God's concern for this next generation. You know, to start asking God to show us how you can play your part. Maybe it be, you know, family, in your wider family, there's a way you can be a positive influence on young people and help them think about Jesus. Maybe you're praying for your local school. Maybe there's people that hang out on a street corner near you. Maybe there's a particular people group that God has put on your heart. Maybe it's an area, a patch of Cambridge that you're praying for. In 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 8, Paul says, you know, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. And that is what I believe is the flavor of reaching out to young people, that we prepare to get to know them and not only share the gospel, but our lives as well. That's the context, the relationship bridge across which the gospel most effectively travels. You know, we have to be willing to open our hearts and our schedules to let young people in. Well, as I wrap up today, just one specific notice I'd like to share with you is that we have a fabulous operations manager called Elaine Grant, who is leaving us this summer. She's leaving us to train for ordination in the Church of England. I'm sorry to say that. And she is doing that in Durham. And so she is going to cycle 300 miles from Cambridge to the northeast, where she grew up. And she's doing that in an attempt to do a fundraising extravaganza for Youth for Christ. She wants to raise, would you believe, £20,000 for Youth for Christ? I mean, that's insane, isn't it? Anyway, and she's doing that so that actually her role can continue, because it's been a massive blessing to us to have someone in our office who's making everything tick, and also be part of this setting up of a wellbeing space in the city of Cambridge for young people. And so you can see at the top of the screen there, if you want to contribute to this extravaganza, there's her web address, tinyurl.com/Gateshead Revisited. Yes, indeed. We love that. Okay. Anyway, you can obviously contact me if you'd like to know more about that. And there's our website, cambridgeyfc.uk, where you can find out more about us and find out how you can pray and support us and get regular updates from us. Okay, Mike, you're unmuted. Do you want to tell us what happens next?